So I was diagnosed almost exactly after 1 year after I graduated from college. But my story did not start with the moment of diagnosis. It started long before. It started with the months and months and months of misdiagnosis, of sensing that something was wrong and desperately craving answers. I was first diagnosed with leukemia and reassured that this was perfectly common in young women and sent home with iron supplements, which of course did not work. And as I started to fall sick with colds and bouts of bronchitis, I ended up in the hospital where doctors ran every test they could think of except for a bone marrow biopsy, which they didn't feel was necessary for someone of my age. And ultimately, I was released with the diagnosis of burnout syndrome. Now, something about burnout syndrome didn't add up for me. But I think, like a lot of young women, and like a lot of people, I felt this sense of intimidation when in the midst of a doctor. I felt like, I haven't gone to medical school. Who am I to question this diagnosis? And yet I knew that what was happening in my body was not a factor of pushing myself too hard. And I started to believe not that something was amiss in my body, but that something was wrong with me. I really felt like I was losing my grip on my sanity. And that's what happens, I think, for so many of us when the actual journey to destination is a long, drawn-out one. And it was also when I did get that actual diagnosis of leukemia, my first indication that no matter how brilliant and caring your medical team might be, you have to learn to become your own advocate. And I learned that lesson again and again and again over the next 4 years of treatment. But very early on in that foray into chemo, I also realized how no two patients are the same. We bring to the illness our own individual set of gifts and also of challenges, be it financial or personal or support system related. And when I learned that I was going to be admitted to the hospital to undergo chemo, I did what most patients do, which is to hit up Google to get a sense of what lay ahead. And I learned in that Google search, right there, sandwiched between hair loss and nausea, that one of the side effects of my chemotherapy was infertility. Now, this came as a great shock to me because my doctors had never mentioned anything about infertility or fertility preservation services. And also because at 22, I hadn't really even given thought to becoming a mother, other than how not to become one before I was ready. And, I understand that oftentimes cancer is the priority and the emergency. But for me, preserving that possibility of becoming a mother someday felt really important to me. It felt like a kind of hope to preserve that choice for my future self, and maybe more than that, to believe that I would exist in that future. Now, we talk about individualized medicine, about personal medicine, but I think so much of the challenge of living with cancer, aside from, the many physical side effects, are really figuring out how to hold on to some sense of self, how to not only survive, but to actually live. And so that really became my challenge in my early 20s. And it's remained a question that I'm continuously trying to find new answers to. I learned early on that one of the great unfairnesses of cancer is how uncomfortable it can be for the people around you. There's a reason why when someone is befallen with tragedy, our first response is often, I have no words. And sometimes when you don't have words, when you're worried about finding the exact right words, you end up saying nothing at all and staying away because of it. And that was something that I found really heartbreaking early on after my diagnosis, to realize that some of the people I expected to be there for me were not going to be able to for different reasons. And there was this sense of feeling increasingly disconnected from the land of the living. I stopped going on social media because it was painful to see my friends, starting careers and traveling the world and getting married and all the other big and small milestones of early adulthood. And for about a year, I very much went into a kind of self-imposed retreat. I didn't know how to face my reality, which made it hard to explain it to the people around me who hadn't lived it. And really, that's what set me on the path of writing, was trying to find those words, yearning for a space where I could talk about the things that felt impossible to talk about. Everything from infertility to early onset menopause because of chemotherapy, to the experience of navigating a romantic relationship when you're navigating an illness, to the maddening part-time job that is dealing and negotiating with health insurance. I wanted to write all of it. And when I first started that process, it was in the privacy of my journal. But what I found in the course of writing my story in my own words, on my own terms, is that I felt lighter afterwards. I wasn't carrying so much in privacy and in the isolation of my body. And there was a kind of clearing sense that I had. And again, this was not fancy writing. It was journal writing. It was purely for myself. But in trying to describe those things, I better understood them. And that made it easier for me to communicate with the people around me. I think so often, when you receive a cancer diagnosis, there's a thing that can happen where everyone puts on a brave, stoic face for each other because we want to reassure each other. And that was true of me, and that was true of my parents and some of my friends. But what happens when everyone is trying to put a brave, stoic face for one another and to nurse those fears in private is that you end up not being able to communicate openly. And so once I was able to take the initiative to say, I know this is scary, I know this is hard, but I want us to be able to talk about the things that scare us and the things that are hard, this miraculous thing started to happen. I had some of the deepest, most powerful conversations of my life in that hospital room. And while perhaps some of my friends stayed away, I began to meet fellow patients. I began to meet all kinds of people, old classmates, teachers, strangers on the internet, who really showed me what understanding and empathy looks like and raised the bar for the kind of person I want to be when someone else is struggling.